Welcome, and thank you for joining National Council of Jewish Women's special briefing in response to the recent mifepristone decisions. My name is Dana Gershon. I use the she, her series of pronouns, and I'm the president of the National Council of Jewish Women. Today, we gather to hear an update on the implications of the two federal court district rulings that came down on Friday regarding the FDA's approval of mifepristone, one of two medications used to self-manage abortions with pills. We will learn from leading experts who will provide background on the medication, the legal implications of this decision, why this is a Jewish issue, and why our Jewish community must act together. First, a few housekeeping notes before we get started. Thank you to the many organizations that I hope you saw listed on that slide at the beginning who have joined us today and who are co-sponsoring today's webinar. We are so appreciative of your support. Everyone's mics are muted in order to prevent background noise. To enable closed captioning, click on the CC or closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. And because we are in webinar mode, you can directly chat the hosts with any questions that arise while you're listening to the speakers today. And finally, if you're having technical issues, please email action@ncjw.org, and we will do the best that we can to help you, though please understand that that can be challenging while the webinar is running. So as most of you know, NCJW is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we work with any and all members of Congress who are interested in improving the lives of women, children, and families. I'm thrilled that we're kicking off this briefing with one of our champions, Representative Kathy Manning, who serves North Carolina's 6th District. Representative Manning has dedicated much of her career to fighting for equal access to health care and reproductive rights. As a member of the Pro-Choice Caucus and the Black Women's Maternal Health Caucus, she has worked with members across the country to address the maternal mortality crisis that we have and to make sure that all people seeking reproductive services have access to them. She is also the first woman chair of Jewish Federations of North America, chair of the board, that is, and she has been deeply involved in the Jewish community. We are so honored to have her with us today to share her perspective on what actions Congress can take to ensure that we all have access to reproductive health care, and also the importance of the Jewish community engaging on this issue. Congresswoman Manning, thank you so much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dana. And I want to thank NCJW for putting this very important Zoom meeting together so quickly. As you always do, you jump into the fight on these really critically important issues. So we all know that on Friday, there was an outrageous decision issued by a federal district court judge who was put in place specifically to make this decision. And the case was brought in Amarillo, Texas, of all places, specifically so that this judge, this very anti-abortion judge, could make this decision. And in fact, the decision that he rendered is unprecedented. Without any scientific evidence that was backing his decision, he basically attacked the FDA approval of mifepristone more than 20 years ago, even though 5 million people have used that medication safely over all the years. So we also know that on the same day, a judge in Washington state issued the exact opposite decision, a decision that basically instructed the FDA not to make any changes in the way mifepristone was manufactured or distributed. So that basically sets up a battle between the circuits, and I believe ensures that this case will probably end up in the Supreme Court. There are a couple, unless the Fifth Circuit, which now has an appeal of the Texas judge's decision, throws his case out, which frankly, I don't think is likely. The Fifth Circuit is located in Louisiana. So I think we'll probably see this get to the Supreme Court. The court can overturn it for a variety of different reasons. One of the reasons that they may choose is that it really lacks the plaintiffs who brought the suit lack standing. They really cannot prove that they had any harm, so this should not be a justiciable case. we are doing a variety of things. The Justice Department, first of all, has already filed a lawsuit, and a variety of members of Congress. We had a emergency meeting of the pro-choice caucus last night, and many of us have already signed on an amicus brief that is being filed in the case. We will do everything we can to fight tooth and nail to overturn the Texas case and to make it clear that this is totally unprecedented, unwarranted case. I think it's important to note a couple of things. Number one, I think more than 400 executives who work at a wide variety of pharmaceutical companies have filed a letter objecting to the decision reached in this case. This would throw a total disarray into the way if this case is allowed to stand, if it's upheld by the Supreme Court, this would throw into total disarray our FDA process for approving drugs. And I think that is probably going to hold a lot of sway. And I do think that there are probably justices on the Supreme Court, even though they are very anti-abortion, they may see this decision as a terrible decision that would result in really awful precedent. There is a slippery slope if this decision is upheld. It could put at risk any drugs in the future that people decide to bring lawsuits against. That it could go, you could see how this easily could be used for vaccines. It could be used for cancer drugs. It could be used for any kind of drug that a group of people objects to, even if the FDA has followed the proper procedures and found the drug to be safe and effective following appropriate medical trials. So what we are doing, in addition to filing the amicus brief, personally, I had a roundtable just this morning in my own district with HHS Secretary Javier Becerra. We brought together a group of reproductive rights providers, doctors, medical professionals, somebody from the North Carolina ACLU. We had patients who talked about their issues. And I think it's important for all of us to bring people together who are concerned about these decisions, is concerned about the impact on women, have roundtables, have town halls, discuss what this will do to women's health care. And I think one thing we all ought to know about mifepristone, it is used not only for abortion care in a two-drug regimen with misoprostol, it's also used for miscarriage care. And right now, mifepristone remains available. It's on the market. Some states are actually stockpiling mifepristone so that it will still be available for people. But the other thing that we have to understand is that even if this drug is taken off the market, medication abortion will still be available through the use of the second drug, misoprostol. And in other parts of the world, medication abortion is in fact done with misoprostol alone. But the advantage of having mifepristone is if you use the two-drug regimen, it is more effective. It causes less side effects. And I think it's important that we understand this because of the particular cruelty of this decision. This decision basically would outlaw the drug that makes medication abortion easier on the patient. It results in less side effects. It doesn't have the same nausea and fever and other problems that you have if you only do the single dose regimen of misoprostol. So there's an element of cruelty here that I think it's important to note. When we asked Secretary Becerra in the roundtable today what he thought would happen, he said he is optimistic. He does not see any way that this Texas case can stand. I don't know if I share his optimism, but I can tell you in Congress, we have introduced a variety of legislation to try to protect women's reproductive rights over time. Of course, I am a co-sponsor of the Women's Healthcare Protection Act of 2023, which would create a federal statutory right for healthcare providers to provide abortions and a right for patients to receive abortions This Women's Health Protection Act has been introduced every Congress since 2013. We are not going to stop until we get this passed. We have also issued a resolution condemning attacks on reproductive care providers. And we had some of our providers this morning talk about increased fear that they are at risk when they go to work. We are supporting the Ensuring Women's Right to Reproductive Freedom Act, which would protect a person's ability to travel across state lines for purposes of obtaining legal abortions. There are states that are actually outlawing a woman's ability to travel to another state to get an abortion. It's reminiscent of the Fugitive Slave Act. That's how horrific that is. We are working on the EACH Act of 2023, which would lift the Hyde Amendment and ensure that those enrolled in government health insurance plan have abortion services coverage. We are working on the Protecting Access to Medication Abortion Act, which, codifies the current mifepristone risk evaluation and mitigation strategy to make sure that people can continue to obtain medication abortion using mifepristone through telehealth and certified pharmacies. And we are going to reintroduce the Stop Anti-Abortion Disinformation Act that was introduced in the 117th Congress, as well as the My Body, My Data Act of 2022, which establishes protections for personal reproductive or sexual health information, including information relating to the termination of a pregnancy. So we are pulling out the stops in Congress. We are working so hard to find legislative fixes for these extreme, both the extreme Texas court opinion, but also the extreme pieces of legislation that are being introduced and enacted in states across the country, particularly across the South. I think that sort of covers what we are doing. I'd like to just mention to all of you that the work you do is so critically important to continue to educate people about these issues, to continue to help people who want to understand how they can access their reproductive health, and to continue to advocate. I know how good you all are at that. I'm going to stop talking. Sheila, I see you came on camera. If there are any questions or anything you want to ask me, I'm happy to answer questions.
Well, first, thank you. It's so wonderful to have you here. You're really our champion, as Dana said. Just one thing, in like a short version, then I'll get to everyone else in just a moment. Why do you think it matters that the Jewish community advocate on this? Like, why do you want to see more Jews? We've got tons of co-sponsors on here. It's not just National Council of Jewish Women. Why should every Jewish organization and every Jewish person that you know get involved on these issues?
Because we're so good at it. When Jewish women want to get something done, they get it done. And our voices are loud, they're strong, they're powerful, and we are educated. And our voices are particularly important here because what's being imposed on us is a religious belief of another religion. And years ago, there was a religious argument made in the abortion cases, and it was not deemed to be the most successful of the arguments. But I think it's important for us to speak up because this is an extremist view of when life begins that is not part of our particular religion. So I think it's important for us to advocate, number one, because we're good at it, and number two, because it's part of our values. Let me add one more piece, and that is, I forgot to mention this, I also introduced in the last Congress the Right to Contraception Act, because as we should know, they're coming after contraception next. There are already laws trying to outlaw the IUD, other kinds of contraceptives that they believe actually cause abortions. They're wrong on that, but they don't care about the science. My bill passed the House. It would protect the right of all persons to use and all medical professionals to provide the full range of FDA-approved contraceptives. My bill did, and by the way, it passed the House, but 194 Republicans voted against it. It did not pass the House, but it didn't make it through the Senate. So we are going to continue to work on that one. And when you talk about reproductive care, I hope you will continue, that you will also talk about the need to protect the full range of FDA-approved contraceptives, because that's up next.
Amen. Thank you so much, Representative Manning, for making the time, for being with us today, and for the incredible work that you do fighting for women and families in the House. We really appreciate everything that you do to advocate for our community, our Jewish community, and for all communities. So thank you.
Thank you, Sheila, for what you do. And thanks to all of your members for all your great work. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Sheila Katz. I'm the CEO of National Council of Jewish Women. I'm proud to be here with you today and to serve as the moderator for the remainder of this program. I just want to start by saying that there's so much going on in the world right now, and probably on the front of a lot of our minds. There was another mass shooting yesterday in Louisville. There's an escalation of terror and ongoing protests for democracy in Israel, and so much more. And sometimes it can just really help to remember where we're trying to get to. And at National Council of Jewish Women, we dream of a world in which women, children, and families don't just survive, but truly thrive on every level. A world in which everyone can make decisions about whether and when to have a family, in which families can flourish free from violence, oppression, stigma, and shame. And we dream of a world in which everyone's bodily autonomy is honored and in which kavod habriot, human dignity, is celebrated. And we can dream of this more equitable world in which access to healthcare, including reproductive care, is unhindered. And so in other words, we dream of a more whole world, the one that we as Jews are commanded to pursue, to work to bring into being. And so I can't think of a better way to move things forward and to open our conversation than actually to kick things off with Rabbi Lauren Holtzblatt, who I have the pleasure of knowing and being close to in Washington, D.C. She is the co-senior rabbi at Addis Israel Congregation in Washington, D.C. She's a proud rabbi for Repro through NCJW. And she moved the nation, and probably many of you, when she officiated Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's Jewish memorial ceremony at the Capitol, honoring Justice Ginsburg as a path-marking role model to women and girls of all ages. You know, she was Ruth's rabbi, and she's an important rabbi and teacher to me and to many of us as well, which is why I'm so honored to introduce Rabbi Lauren Holtzblatt to share some reflections on the significance of this conversation happening during Passover, and then I'll kick off with the rest of our panelists in just a moment. Rabbi Lauren, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sheila, and thank you, NCJW. So grateful for your continued work in this arena, and we are with you, fighting with you. Just to frame this particular moment, as Jews, we find ourselves in a liminal space. We are in Passover. We're going from Chol HaMoed, this idea of having the holiday of Passover, where we can do all kinds of things, and we're moving into Chag, the last days of Passover tonight. And tomorrow in synagogues all over the world, we will read Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea. And the Song of the Sea is found in the book of Exodus, and it is where Moses and the children of Israel, as they are exiting and fleeing and running from Mitzrayim, from Egypt, they're terrified because behind them are Pharaoh and Pharaoh's armies. They're enemies who seek to oppress them. And in front of them, they come along the sea with no path. They can't figure out which way is the way forward. How are they going to move forward? They can't make it across the sea. And if they turn back, they will be killed by Pharaoh and Pharaoh's army. And so in many ways, it sort of mimics this moment that we find ourselves as women, as non-binary people, as the trans community, anyone who is a childbearing person or who is seeking an abortion. We are terrified. But what we should remember about the sea is that even though it feels when they get to that sea that there is no way forward, all of a sudden as a collective, God makes a path for them. Through Moses strikes the sea and the sea splits, and there they walk through a narrow path to freedom. And I think what this moment can teach us is a few things. One is that when they reach the sea, they're afraid. So if you have fear in your heart right now and you're terrified of this moment that we find ourselves in the United States, we're with you, we're afraid. But just because we have fear doesn't mean that there isn't a way forward. What it means is that we have a collective. We have all of us We have representatives in Congress. We have the White House working to help actually move this country forward in the right direction. And so what we need to do is own our fear, look at our fear, but not be paralyzed by our fear, and to feel that there's no way forward. There are many ways forward, and we will find it collectively. I want to wish you all a Chag Sameach, and we're in this. I'm in this with you. We're in this with you. Thanks, Sheila. Back to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks again, Rabbi Lauren Holtzblatt at Adas Israel in Washington, D.C. Now we're going to get into the bulk of the program. A lot of you are here because you've got a ton of questions. Don't we all? It's been confusing what's been happening. And so we have three experts we're going to be hearing from right now. We'll start legally, and then we're going to jump into medical. Fatima Goss Graves is the president and CEO of National Women's Law Center, who, by the way, has just been an incredible champion and partner to National Council of Jewish Women and to all of us in pursuing legal options in fighting for women and families in this country. And then we're also going to hear from Dr. Katie McHugh, who is an OBGYN, chronic pelvic pain specialist, abortion provider, and member of the board of directors of the Physicians for Reproductive Health, another incredible partner to NCJW. And we're blessed today to also have Dr. Hindi Stohl, an OBGYN and director of maternal fetal medicine at Harbor UCLA Medical Center. And Hindi, I hope you don't mind me saying, also a member of the Orthodox community and a rebbetzin, and particularly able to talk about this as a doctor and also as somebody really engaged Jewishly in her community. So my hope here, we don't have like hours and hours, is to try to help people who care about this walk away with just a little bit more of an understanding in what in the heck is going on legally, which Fatima, we're going to start with you. And then Dr. Hindi and Dr. Katie, I'm going to jump back to you for people like, what is mifepristone? You know, what is actually happening here? How is it used? Is this normal that this is happening? All the things. But thank you first and foremost for the three of you being here today. And Fatima, if we could just start with you, our legal expert. This has been a lot. We got a case verdict from Texas. We thought we knew what was happening, and then something came up in Washington, and now the Department of Justice is involved. Can you just walk us back? What happens? What's the current status of things? And what do you think is on the horizon?
Well, first, Sheila, thank you so much, and to Dana and everyone at NCJW for all of the work you have done and everything I know you will do to protect access to abortion care in this country. And Friday was a very confusing day for good reason. You said, what is normal or something? None of this is normal. None of this is typical, okay? But I'll just take a tiny step back to level set a little bit. So federal law requires that any new drug go through a pretty rigorous process with the FDA to determine its safety and its effectiveness. The drug mifepristone went through that process for FDA approval over a 4-year period initially. And just by contrast, at that time, the typical time period for approval was about 15 months and was finally approved in 2000. So that is, you know, not just yesterday, 2000, meaning basically 23 years ago. And so in that time, we've had 2 decades of experience and millions of people who have used mifepristone, and it has an extremely clear record of safety. It's also well established in the law that a judge can't substitute their own beliefs or wisdom, or if they have scientific knowledge, they can't substitute their own science in place of the FDA. So if a judge disagrees with the science or, you know, maybe in this case has adopted sort of a right-wing approach in understanding to medicine, the law has said that that has no place and that you have to defer to the FDA's assessment. Nonetheless, we are here anyway, and that is because of a couple of things. One, this case was filed in Amarillo, Texas, where Judge Kaczmarek is the only federal judge at the moment. And so that was not an accident. In fact, A group had come together following the Dobbs decision and incorporated in Amarillo so that they could bring these types of actions. The second thing to know is that the opinion is sort of wild and unprecedented for a whole bunch of reasons. It's unprecedented that this group of people who can't really establish that they are very injured by mifepristone were able to bring this case at all. Typically, a case like this, if you don't have very much to do with it and you can't establish that you yourself would be injured, you aren't allowed to just file a lawsuit. That's not what happened here. Instead, Judge Kaczmarek not only said that this group was entitled to challenge the FDA's approval of the drug from 2 decades ago, it basically found that the FDA got it wrong and shouldn't have approved it, did not engage in a process that was appropriate that many years ago. And it gave the Department of Justice 7 days. It said, I have decided that the FDA got it wrong. I will stay my own order for 7 days to give the Department of Justice time to appeal the ruling. The Department of Justice immediately appealed to the higher court, the Fifth Circuit, filing a brief highlighting the many, many problems with Judge Kaczmarek's opinion on standing, on the court's relationship to the FDA, and more. One more thing that I'm going to say about Judge Kaczmarek's opinion before I go to Washington State is that it was unusual not only in the law, the opinion was unusual in that it adopted wholesale all sorts of right-wing talking points and terms and tried to put them in place as if that was typical. And you see that sort of partisan approach in other settings. Maybe you see it sometimes in Congress or in political pundits or in writings. Really unusual to see it in a legal opinion, and that is a thing to worry about a lot. So on the same night, I actually think within an hour of Judge Kaczmarek's opinion coming down, a court in Washington had a ruling that put forward almost the opposite idea. Now, this was a case brought by several states. And in that case, the state said, actually, it has been unreasonable for the FDA to continue the types of restrictions that it has historically had on mifepristone, given the record the FDA says mifepristone has, that it is a high safety and effectiveness record. Its long safety record, frankly, is better than many other drugs, including commonly used drugs like Tylenol. And so what the states argued to that court was that the FDA should not have all of these restrictions on the availability of mifepristone. In that case, the court was pretty modest. It said, okay, we're not going to just say the FDA has to get rid of all of these restrictions. We want to let it play out, let the litigation play out further. But it did say that that the FDA cannot take steps that reduce the availability of mifepristone. So now you have 2 basically opposite rulings before the FDA. One that says you may not take any steps to reduce the availability of mifepristone, and the other one says that you got it wrong, mifepristone shouldn't be available. And so those 2 real rulings are what the FDA has before it. One out of Texas is stayed in this period while it's being appealed, but according to Judge Kaczmarek order, that stay ends within 7 days. So that stay would end very soon. The other one was a more limited ruling in that it applied only to the states that came together, which is about 17 states. And it also said, we're not going to upend the status quo. That's, I guess, the last point that I want to make, and then I'll turn it back over to you, is around what the status quo is. Typically, the way that courts would think about something like this is that you would not want to upend what has been the typical way of doing business, the typical status quo, unless you were pretty guaranteed to win and you were ensuring that you weren't going to really harm people in the process. Well, Judge Kaczmarek knows and understands that this has been in place for 2 decades. So this will be giantly disruptive if he has his way in this opinion. But on the other hand, in his many pages, he doesn't really recognize the actual pregnant person as having much of a stake here. In fact, he has this wild theory that, really those pregnant people, and he would just talk about only women, that women need to just be protected and that they don't really know and have the capacity to make these types of decisions about whether to terminate a pregnancy and that they come to regret it, which is a giant right-wing talking point that is not rooted in rigorous research, but it is one that he, again, is trying to make true through his rulings. So here's where we are with a ton of uncertainty, I know, but the most important thing that I just want to name is that right now we are in a status quo situation. His ruling is stayed, and I know it is scary having to wait for these courts to work it out. But what I would hate for people to come away with is that the access and availability of mifepristone has not changed between Friday and today. It is still available in the same way that it was available. And we would not want people to take steps or to confuse people to thinking that they can't get the abortion care that they are entitled to and able to get in this country.
Thank you so much, Fatima. I have a ton of follow-up questions, but I am actually going to jump to our doctors for a moment and then come back. And I'm noticing a lot of people submitting questions through the Q&A. Keep doing that because I'm going to bring some of them up in a minute. But I think, Fatima, it's important to know that people can still access that medication abortion and mifepristone currently. And also one of the things we heard from so many people joining this call, a lot of people in like California and New York and other places, is this was like a first moment for them in which they felt that their rights were being threatened from somebody they didn't even vote into, office. And so this one judge, because it's the FDA, could impact the availability nationwide. And so there's a lot to say about how the Washington case will come in and if the Supreme Court will come in and what that will look like. But I think it has actually renewed a lot of people who might have felt on the sidelines a bit that they were protected to showing up and getting connected. And it's something that we've started to see. So to everybody joining maybe for the first time, I'd like to say welcome. When anybody is threatened, we're all threatened, and we need everybody to be fighting for this. With that, Dr. McHugh, maybe I'll start with you. We're using these words of these drugs as if everybody knows what they are. And I wonder if we might take a step back for just a minute and you could just share a little bit about mifepristone, how people use it. We heard Fatima talk that it's very safe. Is this the most commonly used drugs around abortion, miscarriages? What can you tell us just a little bit about this generally for people who are newer to understanding this drug?
Absolutely. And for those who are new, welcome to the fight. This is an exciting time to be joining a really passionate movement. And what the previous speakers, both Fatima and the Congresswoman, said is all true in regards to the safety and how effective abortion pills are. Mifepristone in particular is the first drug in the medication abortion regimen. There are 2 different drugs that we prescribe. The first drug is mifepristone, and it blocks the hormone that lets pregnancy continue to develop. It's an incredibly safe medication, and most people, when they take it, don't notice any side effects or any symptoms, and they think that maybe it didn't work, but it is working on the inside. That medication, the mifepristone, is the one that makes medication abortion so effective and so safe. It is what has really changed medication abortion over the last 20 plus years to make it such an accessible and such a safe choice when people are terminating a pregnancy. It is by far the most common method that people choose to terminate a pregnancy. And we have seen that play out in studies over the last several decades. Medication abortion continues to be safe, even though the judges and the courts are stating otherwise. And I think that is a really important point, that just because this fake news, this idea of a lack of safety or a lack of effectiveness is making the rounds in the news cycle, does not change the truth, which is that it is safe. It is a very conscientious way to end a pregnancy, and it is a very personal choice that should not be informed by courts or lawmakers, and instead should be a decision made by a patient, their family, their religious circle, and their doctor. As an abortion care provider myself in states that do not fall under the Washington protection, the Washington state case protection, my experience is that patients are very confused. They are very scared. And that, of course, is the point. The point is the fear and the confusion and the oppression of the choices and the accessibility of healthcare. So just because the courts are making decisions here does not actually mean that anything has changed with how effective or how safe the medication is. And it also doesn't change the fact that we know our own bodies best and should be trusted to make our own decisions.
Yeah, and just one follow-up question, and then Dr. Stohl, you're up. Just curious, who needs this? Who most needs access to mifepristone, as far as who are you seeing needing this the most in our country right now?
That's a great question. Anyone who wants an abortion should be able to get one. When we talk about abortion restrictions, abortion bans, we are actively targeting the most oppressed populations already. Those are folks who already will have a challenge getting to a doctor's office, paying for their medical care. I live and work in Indiana and Ohio, where we have laws that prevent insurance from paying for abortion care. And so everybody pays out of pocket. It is expensive, it is burdensome. We have waiting periods in both of those states, which will require patients to take more time off of work and find childcare for longer periods of time, et cetera. So the people who this harms the most are the people who are already harmed the most. These are Black and brown populations, populations of lower income or of immigrant status. These are people who are unhoused. These are people who already are oppressed by our medical system and by our society in general. And they are the ones that are being the most harmed.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for painting the picture. Everyone should have access to it. And for many people who need abortion care, who can afford to get on a plane and can afford other options, they have them. But people who can't get out of their jobs or can't access childcare or can't afford to get on a plane, this is one of the best options and safest options for them. Thanks for pointing that out. Dr. Stohl, I'm curious, just in your experience, I know you've been with women and people who can get pregnant in difficult moments, in finding out perhaps that their pregnancy isn't viable. Can you talk a little bit about some of the scenarios you've been with people and where, this whole conversation on abortion bans, how it fits into either miscarriage care or terminating pregnancies because there isn't a viable fetus?
Thanks so much, Sheila. Again, thanks to all the panelists. Thank you for allowing me to be included. I really do appreciate the opportunity to come as a physician and as a Jewish woman and a Jewish rebbetzin in the Orthodox world, because I do think that there's a lot of perspectives there that are nuanced and sometimes, probably don't get as shared. So, I'm going to, if you don't mind, speak to you as specifically, I think you're kind of asking, but as a rebbetzin in the Orthodox world who has a medical hat, as opposed to a doctor who's Jewish. And I think what you're highlighting is really important. That is so striking to me about the current issue, even more than any other sort of abortion-related matter, because once we are navigating the issue of FDA approval of a medication, we're now having the courts come in to the practice of medicine. And so not only are we wondering about our religious freedom as Jewish individuals, we're worrying about our ability to practice medicine in this country that's politically motivated. It's funny that almost simultaneous to this ruling, the FDA just removed its approval on a medication called McHugh that some of you might have heard about. It's a medication that was used for many years to help prevent preterm delivery. And basically, it was found in medical science with medical trials to potentially or likely not be effective. It was first thought to be effective and then not be effective. And so the FDA removed approval because it was not found to be medically effective. And what a fascinating contrast that in almost the same time, the FDA is being asked to remove a drug that is safe and is effective for not just abortion, but for a myriad of other indications in obstetrics and gynecology and otherwise. I mean, literally those two things on the same plate couldn't be so starkly different. And so I think as you describe, there's women in the communities, in our Jewish communities and across all communities, who need access to care, maybe not even for an abortion. Maybe we haven't highlighted yet that mifepristone is actually used for labor induction in a number of, not all facilities, but it's part of a labor induction protocols. It's cheaper. It can be accessed by a pill. It's something that could be used in other underdeveloping countries. It is used for miscarriage management. It's used for cases where the pregnancy is not viable. That's not an abortion in the classic political term, even though I know that our medical literature calls it spontaneous abortion, but it's a miscarriage, right? So there are a lot of uses that should be completely apolitical. And yet somehow the court is coming in and telling me as a Jewish woman, me as a rebbetzin, how am I going to hold that hand for that woman who needs something medically? And now the court says she can't get it for no real medically apparent reason. I just want to highlight one quick thing also, again, with the Orthodox hat. For those who are familiar with Orthodox Jewish law, again, I'm not an Orthodox rabbi and I'm not pretending to be so, but there is a concept in the Orthodox literature that a fetus may not have the sort of status of a fetus until about 40 days. It's called mai ba'alma in Hebrew. And I highlight that because, again, I'm not sort of poskening here. I'm not giving rabbinic authority, but there are plenty of rabbis, even in the Orthodox world, who would allow abortions prior to 40 days when perhaps for similar circumstances, they may not after. And before 40 days, medication abortion is perfect. And so not only are we talking about the miscarriage or issues of induction of labor, or but dare I say, outside of the OBGYN, treatment for Cushing syndrome, which mifepristone is used for. But even now, even in the abortion realm and in the Orthodox world, when rabbis are giving their sanction and perhaps even telling women to obtain an abortion, now their religious freedom is curtailed. And what do I tell that woman who comes to me? How do I get her the care that she needs and that she deserves and that she's religiously allowed to get? And she wants to practice religiously, but it's not available because the court said it can't be.
Yes. Ooh, there's so much here. And I feel like at the heart of all of this, I'm hearing about the dignity for the person who's pregnant, like the choices that we should have if we can become pregnant, and what it looks like to be able to live, for those people on this call who are Jews, as religious minorities in this country with a full set of rights in line with our beliefs and traditions. And so I'm just so grateful for you painting this picture. Sometimes when people hear the word abortion ban, they think of something that's very, very narrow. And what I'm hearing now is an expanded understanding of how abortion bans impact everyone clearly who would like to terminate pregnancies, of which we believe they should be able to, for any reason, as many times, et cetera. And also that this impacts everybody who wants to be pregnant and is trying to have a healthy pregnancy and to be healthy themselves. And so, gosh, there's just so much at stake here. And Representative Manning shared also the impact on birth control, IVF, et cetera. We could be here for hours. I do want to ask another follow-up question of Fatima, and believe it or not, we're going to start wrapping up soon, which we promise we'll continue to share information as it comes. Fatima, we're still left in limbo. We know what the status is right now. I'm curious, there's many paths our country could go down right now. Where do you see the Supreme Court in that, and how soon do you think? If you might take a guess, we know you don't have a crystal ball. And also the number one question I'm getting in the Q&A is about Comstock and Comstock Act. And I'm just curious if you could share a little bit about that.
Sure. And, in general, I don't like to make Supreme Court predictions. But one thing that I will predict is that this question around FDA approval of mifepristone is eventually going to end up there, in part because you have two conflicting decisions that it would be impossible, frankly, for the FDA itself to comply with. And that really strengthens the Supreme Court's reasons to ultimately take that case. But I will just caution everyone that we've been down similar roads before. And the big question is, some of this will take some time before it actually gets to the Supreme Court, and whether the really outrageous Kaczmarek decision will be stayed longer than the 7 days he gave himself is the thing that a lot of people are paying attention to, and basically planning scenarios. What if it is not stayed? Then what do we do? And what I will tell people who are sort of nervous about that is, let's just do one thing at a time. Right now, we're in status quo. If we get to the point where that decision goes into effect, then there are a range of options available. Right now, we're in status quo. On Comstock, if I could just say a couple of things, because I think most people are like, what is this 150-year-old statute that is suddenly supposed to apply to my life? And it is a totally reasonable question. It's like this zombie statute that has come back to life, that was born and actually out of step, even at the time, in many ways, with the public. It was the idea that this statute was preventing the mailing of all sorts of things that were considered to be morally not right, morally not fit, effectively. And there have been a lot of court decisions over time that have undermined the idea of Comstock Act's applicability to our modern life. The reason folks are nervous in this moment is because the extreme right is reading the Dobbs decision to mean that everything is on the table, that all sorts of rulings that have applied for a long time no longer apply. And so for today, does Comstock control the ability to have much happen? I would say most courts would say no, but the challenge that we have is we have judges like Kaczmarek who have a very different agenda and have made that plain. So unfortunately, I wish I could say that Comstock is something that we will never have to worry about. The Department of Justice did put out a legal memo with its own interpretation of Comstock just a few months ago. And it basically said you would have to have an intent to violate the law. And since they're pretty clear on their interpretation of federal law, I think most people have hopefully some greater comfort around Comstock's applicability. But that doesn't mean that you won't see people try to apply it in places that it does not belong. And it for sure could be applied outside of the context of abortion. So much of what we've talked about today, the FDA's authority, these sort of rogue decisions and Comstock, they are not just limited to abortion. They're not just limited to contraception. This is a part of a broader effort to control our bodies and lives and futures in this country.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. And thank you to all our amazing panelists as we're here today to try to expand our understanding of what's taking place. I think like the legal chaos and the chaos generally is a part of the strategy. And so everything we can do to make sure people have the correct information and can understand like what's in our control and what are we fighting for is another step towards justice.
And Sheila, if I could just say one quick thing, because I see in the chat, someone said, oh, I hope we aren't waiting till Friday to plan. Rest assured, no one is waiting until Friday to plan.
Yes, yes. No, and we are actively planning for as many scenarios as we can imagine, and and our work doesn't stop until everybody has access to make their own health-informed decisions for their bodies, their lives, and their futures. So Fatima, everybody check out National Women's Law Center and thank them for the work they're doing, including the case in Missouri with some of our rabbis for repro suing over separation of church and state. Dr. McHugh, Physicians for Reproductive Health, leading the way and helping doctors advocate on this and making sure our physicians and our doctors are able to actually do their jobs. And Dr. Stohl for your work, not only as a rebbetzin, but as a doctor in the community. We're just so grateful to be in this fight with all of you. And as I wrap up, I know a lot of you are like, what can I do? And we're lucky because I've got two people from NCJW's team who are going to tell you what you can do. But I do just want to close by saying, particularly because this was a briefing for the Jewish community, that it is so, so critical that the Jewish community as a whole act together where we can. There is an incorrect religious narrative that abortion and religion don't go together. And after the Jobs decision, the Reform movement, the Conservative movement, the Reconstructionist movement, and the Orthodox Union all put out statements saying this was a violation of religious freedom. There are some differences of interpretation of the law between the different sects of Judaism, but where we agree, which is so wonderful when we do, right? Where we agree is that this is a Jewish issue. And this is a dignity issue, and that people should be able to make these decisions for themselves, and that people who are pregnant shouldn't be harmed. So with that, I want to thank you all for joining us and turn it over to Shira and Glenn, who will introduce themselves and tell you what you can do right now.
Thank you. I'm Glenn Northern. I co-direct our abortion access campaign, and I'm really grateful for all of you being on this call and for our speakers today. Now, here are opportunities to act. We will be dropping links in the chat for all of these actions, and we will send them in a follow-up email to everyone who's registered. First, we want you and the Jewish communal organizations which you lead to pledge to protect and expand abortion access. This pledge is for individuals as well as organizations.
Next, one of the most important ways we can ensure access to medication abortion is to urge the Department of Health and Human Services to make it easier to access medication abortion right now. There are existing regulations which they could remove so that it is easier for everyone to access this regimen in this moment when mifepristone is still available as part of medication abortion. Another way you can make an impact is to be part of the critical culture work needed to destigmatize abortion by declaring loudly that mifepristone is safe, effective, and belongs in our communities. You can do this in a variety of ways. Use your social media platform to lift up Judaism's support for abortion and information about the safety and efficacy of mifepristone. We've got a social media guide for you. And we urge you to share if you or a loved one has a story of using mifepristone. We invite you to share that story through our partnership with Jewish Women's Archive. You are also invited to share all stories which illustrate why we need full access to reproductive health care.
And last, but definitely not least, give generously to the Jewish Fund for Abortion Access. This is the best way to give Jewishly to strengthen our Jewish movement to fight for abortion access. The fund was designed for moments like this, to provide an emergency response for people who need care right now. Thank you again for being here today. As the cases involving mifepristone make their way through the courts, we at National Council of Jewish Women are committed to keeping you updated and continuing to build a strong Jewish voice for reproductive freedom. Please reach out to us if we can ever be of support to you or your organization. Thank you again.